Dr. Alison Mc Letchie. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Yay, I'm so excited we're doing this today and that you made time to make time in this global, the multifaceted nature of pandemics we're experiencing right now.
we're,
So,
we're living through history, right?
yes, we really are, right? And speaking of history, you are part of my historical vlog series called Please Say Black. And I am so excited that this is sponsored by the Anti-Blackness Reader. And so I just want to kind of reorientate my viewers to what this project is. The Anti-Blackness Reader is a social experiencing of Blackness. It's the centering of Blackness. It's Black truth-telling, Black storytelling. It is exposing and working to eliminate anti-Blackness in the world we live in. And so part of that project, the Anti-Blackness Reader Project, is what this vlog series is called Please Say Black. And what we're doing here is doing the work of the Anti-Blackness Reader Project, centering Black storytelling. We are deconstructing theories relating to Black culture, critical race theory, which in the last couple of weeks have become a curse word. And so this is the work we do in this particular video series. I am so fortunate to be connected to so many amazing academics who are willing to have these candid, concise and thoughtful conversations with me around their research and around what we see happening. And so today, our very, very, very special guest is Dr. Alison Mc Letchie. And Dr. Alison Mc Letchie is an assistant professor at South Carolina State University, where she teaches classes in anthropology and sociology. She's our own version of a rock star. She has worked on several films, including We Came a Long Way by Faith, Catholic Hill, and St. James the Greater Church. She's also been featured in Bottom in the Road. So she is a lecturer. She has toured multiple universities. As recently, she was at Plymouth State University in New Hampshire and giving the Sarah Herrera Memorial Lecture Award. So there's just all these amazing things that Alison has going on, and she's taken the time to tell us about all of this amazing stuff today. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Is there anything that you want our audience to know about you before we start today's conversation?
Well, I just want everyone to recognize that what we're trying to do is really an engaging conversation, right? So I hope we're not going to be sounding too scholarly or too kind of hoity-toity, because certainly that's not my intention. My hope
I never try to be hoity-toity.
Well, many people who know me would say that that's just my default, that I'm a snob, but I remind them it's not my fault that I have standards.
I like to think that I'm just a tad bit bougie, but who isn't?
Right? But I'm hoping that we can at least kind of unpack some of these issues together in a way that it's relatable and it's understandable, and that your audience can then take it and be able to speak with some level of knowledge, and also maybe even pick up some of the work and do some of the research, because I think it's something that there's a lot of work still to be done around.
And that's definitely something I hope happens with this series as well. A lot of times you and I both work in the academy, and so a lot of times we are used to dealing with theoretical concepts, high-level concepts, and sometimes there are so many people who don't get included in those conversations. And so what I'm hoping happens with this series is that we bring in all types of people who typically wouldn't pick up, an academic journal. Let's be honest, like, who really wants to pick those up? I mean, some of us are nerds, and so we're like, yeah. But in general speaking, like, we want to make sure that whatever work we're doing applies itself to the largest amount of people, right? And so
But
I
also,
think,
I mean, also, I think if we're talking about this concept of Blackness, right, let's recognize that in Black culture, the idea of who owns knowledge, it's not in an ivory tower somewhere, right?
yes,
That
yes,
knowledge is seen as something that is available to all. And, you know, we have to spend some time kind of rejecting the Eurocentric notion that it has to be written in some script somewhere, right? I was having a
yes,
conversation earlier today with another colleague of mine, right? So we come, you know, European historians like to remind us all the time that, you know, that we have no history because we can't offer them the books,
yeah,
right? But the fact of the matter is that no, we actually did have some folks with books,
yeah,
right? But we also had and continue to have a long legacy of a griot tradition, right?
yes,
And when we talk about the embodiment of knowledge, right? Sometimes it is actually in a physical person or in a physical occupation.
yes, yes,
Because
I'm
you may
here
be
for
called
that.
a historian and I may be a griot, doesn't mean that what we're offering is any less, right? It's just different ways of codifying, right?
Yeah,
And so I
and
think
different ways of
that's something that's
knowing.
also important.
Yeah, and I was
Yeah.
just supposed to, and different ways of knowing, and I fully affirm your position that we have to reject those symbols and those signifiers that say knowledge only exists in this capacity. So thank you for being a kindred spirit. And so I do want to talk a little bit about why this conversation is happening now and why I pulled you into my corner. I was like, Alison, we have to have this talk. You know, this conversation is about the very intersectional nature of Blackness. And I think because we live in an anti-Black world, people tend to want to make Blackness flat and monolithic, right? It's this one thing. And as we begin to expand and to grow our own truth telling and speaking truth to power, we get to say, no, Blackness is a wealth of things.
Right.
And we are intersectionality. Like, I love the idea of intersectionality in a broader sense. But like, if I never left the community of Blackness, I would still experience intersectional knowledge. You know what I'm saying? Because that's just how diverse our community is. And so I think that there have been two things that have recently happened kind of in our, like our, in the cultural conversation, in the blogosphere, even in terms of pop culture. One, Senator Kamala Harris, you know,
Mm-hmm.
formally being courted by Joe Biden to be his running mate. And a lot of people were having conversations around, is she Black? How can she be Black? How can she be African? How is she South Asian? And I mean, I saw it across social media. People were like, this can't exist, right? And so there was a struggle because, again, I think there was this, like, hey, if you're a Black woman, this is what you look like, this is what you sound like. And then the second thing, which is probably hitting a little closer to home for us, is the, I don't know what we call it. Is it a scandal, Alison? White women pretending to be people of color?
We
Is it
have to.
like, I don't know, what do we
I
call
don't
it?
know what you call it either, other
I,
than I I I don't know, because I'm trying not to use the word that would come to my mind, which is a very ugly word, and you know speaks to that particular time in entertainment when people would dress up as something they're not and try to mimic behavior.
yeah. So
Um,
we've
and
seen,
I'm not going to use that word on purpose
yeah,
because
Well, I'm okay with you using any word you want to. I don't police Black people.
No. I'm not using it on purpose because
Yeah.
I want to be careful, because the word is a loaded word.
Yeah.
At least it is for me, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't want to accuse people of doing something.
I think I feel comfortable saying, you know, I don't know how I feel about saying the names of the people who have perpetuated,
right.
you know, who've done this crime. But this idea of like academic blackface is
Right.
what I think we're seeing. And as a result of, and multiple instances too, so it's not even like the one person, right? Like it's like a series of folks. And I think what has happened as a result of us seeing these different instances of academic blackface, people are having conversations around, well, should we start gatekeeping Blackness? Who is Black? Who isn't Black? Who comes to the table? Who's not allowed to come to the table? And so it's created this really rich place for discussion, right? And then going back to the reason why we're here today, which is we need a better understanding of all of the complexities of Blackness. And that includes thorough conversations around the Black experience, not only in the United States, but globally. It includes conversations about what does it mean to be an immigrant and Black. It includes conversations about all types of people who are situated as part of the African diaspora, right? And so that's why you're here today.
Okay, well, let's see what we can do about that.
So I am not versed at all in today's topic, so I'm super excited about learning. And before we get started, I'm going to get you to pronounce for me again, and for our listeners, the group of people we're talking about today.
Okay, so let me remind or say to your listeners that my own experience is that I am from the Caribbean. I'm specifically I was born on the island of Trinidad, which is about 10 miles off the coast of Venezuela on the South American continent. The country, however, that I'm from is from the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. So it's two islands, one nation. They're very different in terms of their cultural and ethnic diversity. But because of British colonization, we're one country. So that being said, the specific group that we're speaking about is the group that would be in both Trinidad and in Guyana, which is a former British colony on the continent of South America. That group, that ethnic or racial group, would be called Dougla, Dougla, Dougla.
Dougla.
Right. And what a Dougla is a person who has one parent that is of East Indian descent or South Asian descent, let's put it that way, and one parent who is of African descent. Okay, so you have these two parents and they create this child, and this child is called Dougla, a Dougla. Okay, and of course, understanding that race is a social construct, right? So it is something it is a category that is created in a particular place at a particular time. It can change over place and time, right? For places like Trinidad and for Guyana, because you had, once emancipation took place and African slaves or Africans were no longer enslaved, the British were desperately looking, and not just the British, but the British in particular in this instance, were desperately looking for workers to replace Africans on these territories like Jamaica, Trinidad and Guyana, because these are relatively large territories in the Caribbean, right? And so just in a very simple way, emancipation comes, there's this attempt at apprenticeship that doesn't really work out too well. But many people of African descent, formerly enslaved, were like, you know what, peace out, I'm done with y'all. And they left the plantations, okay? And they may have moved into more urban areas, right? Because of course, plantations tended to be in the rural areas, sugar plantations in particular. And the British were desperate. So, you know, well, where are we going to look? So they went to India, right?
Another place where they had colonized.
Right. So they have.
I just want to make that really clear.
Yeah. So
the British were busy.
British, right?
They were busy.
Right. And so they and I mean, I'm kind of abridging all this here because in the interim, you have other groups. The British are trying to bring in other groups to these territories. The Chinese, okay, some of my ancestors, they tried to bring in.
Oh, wait, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
They try to bring in other Europeans at various points, you know, Portuguese. They try all sorts of stuff, okay, but it's just not sufficient, okay.
For
so
the
then
amount of productivity that was needed at the time.
Right. Okay. And you know, I hate to say it, but they were kind of sneaky too, right? Because you know they were also, while they're trying to do that, they're also trying to prevent these formerly enslaved Africans from actually purchasing small plots of land, right?
Yeah.
So they work out the scheme and they bring in indentured laborers from India. And they say to them, in essence, you can retain your cultural, religious, you can retain all of that. You can come and work in these territories it started off as 5 years, I think, and then it extended to 10 or maybe the reverse, but it's a contract, right? You come, you work for us, and then, you know, you are allowed to return to India.
So it's a contract of servitude.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
I just want to make sure we're being clear. So they weren't bought in to be enslaved. They were bought in to be indentured servants.
Indentured servants, but the conditions are just about that of slavery, yeah. Right? Let's make no bones about it, okay? So over time...
Alison, why would someone have taken, like, because when I think about the servitude that was established in the United States in the 14th and 15th century, a lot of those people came because they thought that they could start a new life and eventually buy themselves land and build community in the United States. So I'm curious, why do you think so many people left India to be indentured servants in the Caribbean and South America?
Well, remember, there are also different things happening, right? So remember, in India, you have a caste system, okay. That kind of makes it so that you're not allowed to move up, right? You're not allowed to be born in one caste and raised to another caste. You have a caste system.
It's pretty solidified.
Because the British are in charge, right? Yeah. They could round up people. They can say, you know, do you want to go to prison or you want to go over here, right? So there are different reasons why people are doing this, and people are just poor, right? So yeah, why not? I mean, so there are lots of different. So you have this influx of people from Southern Asia who are coming. Most of them are Hindu, but not exclusively. There are some Muslim Southern Asians. There are also some Christians among them. And they come and they settle primarily in Guyana and Trinidad. There are pockets, like in Jamaica, you have some, even in some of the French colonies that are
Okay.
now departments, right? Martinique and Guadeloupe. So you have people that are coming in, but primarily what you end up when we get up to the 20th century and people were beginning to look at self-governance and independence, you have in Guyana and in Trinidad the two largest ethnic groups, okay, as we're about to enter this period of independence, political independence in the 1960s. The two largest ethnic groups are people of East Indian or people of African descent. So in Trinidad, for example, it's almost like 39% to 39%. It's almost even, their
Yeah.
numbers,
So heavy
right?
pockets of people.
Right. And then
And
you
the
have,
Africans are formerly enslaved during this
pardon me,
time as well.
what did you say? Do you mind
And
repeating?
so I'm just keeping up with the flow of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have indentured servants from South Asia, and we
Mm-hmm.
have the formerly enslaved Africans.
Right. And then over time, the indentureship scheme itself changed, right?
Yeah.
So whereas initially people were promised their passage back, the landowners eventually woke up to the fact, okay, well, maybe I don't want them to go back.
Yeah.
So I will say, if you stay, we will then give you a plot of land.
Oh, okay.
So, and this is more kind of like inside baseball, I guess, is the term you Americans love to use. So this may be a little bit too much, but
No, I think it's interesting.
in terms of these places, current kind of political organization, right? And coming out of that kind of British system of divide and rule, which we kind of joke about, but it's real, right?
Yeah.
What emerges over time in both Guyana and in Trinidad are political parties for whom their power base, their supporters, tend to belong to one or the other ethnic group. Okay, so in these spaces now, you have, alongside that kind of national politicking, very often people are aligned according to their ethnic group. So if you belong to one ethnic group, people make assumptions that you must also support this political party.
So that's connected to like political values, behavior, voting behaviors, etc.
Voting behavior. I wouldn't say political values per se. I would say voting behavior.
Okay.
And the assumptions, right? So there are certain assumptions and stereotypes that are made based on these things. And so this can lead, and sometimes does lead, to tension that may be just verbal exchanges, but occasionally can result in actual violence.
Okay.
Right. And so that's the kind of Caribbean scene. So that's what's happening there. And so I can talk more specifically about some of the work that I do when I look at the concept of Dougla, right?
Wait, before we get to that, we have to get to the crescendo, because I think we missed that. So now we have all of these thousands of South Asians who are indentured, and then the formerly enslaved. Now, in Keena's mind, that makes for like, a combination of relationships that results in intermarriage or interracial or inter-ethnic communities. But can you expand on that a little bit more? Because I'm sure these people didn't live side by side and never crossed the fence, so to speak, right?
Right. So there are lots of things that we have to kind of unpack here, right? So remember, that if you come as an indentured servant, okay, by and large, what the folks who are actually physically getting off the boat, so to speak, are men, right?
Okay.
Women do come, but remember, whoever is recruiting in India or wherever they're recruiting, they're really looking for men because plantation work is hard,
Yeah.
okay? So especially initially, you have mostly men coming. These plantations tend to be in very rural settings. So they're being taken to plantations, and they are basically working sun up to sundown. They're not being allowed a lot of holidays. You know, it's not like, you know, we have a 40-day work week
Yeah.
and, you know, 3
Yeah.
weeks of vacation time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. You also have, again, you have the religious and language differences, right? Because unlike the Africans who were brought to Trinidad, the idea that they must speak English is not something that's being imposed. The idea that they must become Christian
It's
is
not
not
being
being
imposed. Okay.
imposed, okay? At least not initially, okay? So we always have to say that, right? Not initially. So folks are allowed to retain their own cultural practices, and this is really important, of course, because it gives you an excellent sense of self if you can speak your own language,
Yeah.
or, you know, at least, and practice a more or less similar religion. But it's not complete isolation, okay? It's not, because there's still occasions where they are still meeting groups of people. And what's also important, especially in the case of Trinidad, there is also a diversity of the African that is there, right? So you have Africans who came as a result of the War of 1812 in America. You have a group of Black Americans who fought on the side of the British and come across to Trinidad as kind of like their
free.
reward. They are free, right? Unlike many of the Africans who are already on the island, right?
Who were enslaved.
Many of whom are enslaved, not all, but many, right? And just because of the weirdness of how Trinidad in particular is colonized, it starts off as a Spanish colony. The Spanish then invite people to settle when they figured out that the British are trying to make moves on the island. And so you have this influx of mostly French, though not exclusively French, folks who are coming in. And the one thing they have to promise is to be Catholic and to swear allegiance to the Spanish king or the Spanish crown. And they're given land. And if you're white, you're given land, you know, X number of acres based on the size of your family and the number of enslaved people you come with. But if you're a free colored person, you also get land, again, based on the size of your family, but you're going to get less, right? Because,
Yeah.
you know, you can't be too uppity there, right? And so, and then you have the British, the British eventually arrive and they impose their own form of enslavement, and they come with their own, you know, the British and the Scot colonizers, and, you know, hence my last name. And so it's all complicated. It's a hot mess,
Yes.
right? And so you have these folks who they are into, because where are they going to go to buy stuff, right? And, you know, if you have to see a doctor, if you know, you go into the village, whatever, right? They're meeting people there, okay? But again, we have to recognize that there are things being said, you know, sometimes on purpose, but, you know, don't trust those folks because they think you're here to take their jobs or whatever it is, right? So there is that. And then over time, eventually, as you see more and more East Indian women arrive or Southern Asian women arrive, right? You're not going to have a lot of intermarriage. Now, men being men, who are they sleeping with, right?
Yeah.
But over time, as women arrive, then they're going to be marrying women who, they're just culturally familiar, right? Nothing,
So,
no harm, no foul
so
in that.
there's a possibility though, and this is me being scandalous, there's a possibility that there are men who may have like African families and also
Yeah. I mean,
families with their South Asian counterparts.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the thing that we've got to realize, because when I looked into this, there was a point where the census folks were taking records, right? And they would include this kind of mixed category. But then for some reason that got lost. And again, that just speaks to the kind of social construction of race, right? And then in more recent census data, you see this category of, first it just is a category of mixed, and then there's another category of mixed, but specifically of Indian and African descent, right? That's more recently. But the census folks, the people who are collecting data, and we all know that stuff is happening. People are having sex,
Yeah.
right? And so this is again where I go back to kind of like my point of entry into this idea of what is a Dougla, right? Because my anthropology thesis, I was interested in this particular occurrence that happens on the southern part of the island of Trinidad in this town called Cyperia, where you have a Black Madonna. It's not the only Black Madonna on the island, but this particular Black Madonna is...
For some of my viewers, can you just tell them what a Madonna is, just in case?
Okay, so a Madonna is not the woman who sings, but rather
Yeah, we're not going to call her Black.
It's a representation of Mary, right? The mother
Yes.
of Christ. Okay.
Yes.
So we have this Black Madonna in the town of Cyperia, or Cyperia, depending on how you want to pronounce
talking
it.
to?
Yeah. And Hindus, particularly, but not exclusively, Hindus who are overwhelmingly South Asian, people of South Asian descent, go to this church and pray before her as Hindus, not as Catholics. They're not saying Hail Mary,
Yeah.
They're there as Hindus praying to her, using Hindu prayers and using Hindu prayer practices. And so I was kind of fascinated by that whole thing, right? And this has been happening for over 150 years. So how can this happen when politically you have this kind of tension between the groups, right? So this whole idea of is this creolization, is this syncretism, and these are all like hoity-toity intellectual terms, all right? So but the basis of what I came away with was that what I was seeing was not creolization or syncretism, but rather Douglarization, right?
Okay.
Truly this coming together of two cultures, and what I believe was happening was something new, something unique, something that was specific to that space, right? So that was my first kind of grappling with this idea of what does it mean to be a Dougla. Okay.
What would you say that what those people were doing in that practice was existing in between both cultures?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think they're firmly planted in where they are, right? So Catholics remain Catholics, Hindus remain Hindus. There are people of Orisha or even some Muslims, even some fundamentalist Christians, right, who kind of reject this notion. But they're firmly there. And they see that statue as through the lens of whatever their faith tradition teaches
Okay,
them.
so it's almost like they reimagine the artifact as belonging to them in certain ways.
Right. Okay. And that the space itself allows that to happen, of course, for me was fascinating because it is physically in a Catholic church, right? And you know, there were people there who were Catholic who were helping and teaching non-Catholics how to approach this, you know, based on their own experiences, right? And so there was no kind of conversion. You need to say it this way. No, this is how people do it, or this is how I've seen people do it. So anyway, so I was interested in that, and then I started to look at popular music in Trinidad, which, you know, for our purposes is calypso primarily. And when I looked at various calypsos, I saw what was emerging were these particular narratives about Douglas, right? So either the Dougla is seen primarily as the embodiment, the physical embodiment of the best of both cultures, right? The physical embodiment of what it truly means to be Trinidadian, right? Because you have the two largest ethnic groups, and out of those two largest ethnic groups emerges this new person.
Yes.
Right? Firmly grounded in these traditions. So there was that. But then there were also songs that were talking about how that Dougla person undermines or devalues, right? Primarily Africanness.
Okay.
And that it is another attempt to de-Africanize, right? And it was particularly painful for some of these singers because, again, unlike people of South Asian heritage, of course, we know that Africans primarily were forced to give up their language, their religion.
They didn't have the same agency as the South Asian people
did. Right. So someone, for many of these singers, the idea of someone being a Dougla means here's another attempt to remove that, right? And I say primarily de-Africanized because many of these singers are, of course, of African descent, right? Okay. Many calypso singers. So they were telling it from a particular perspective, right? And so that's how I came, for your listeners and viewers, for you to understand how I became fascinated with this concept of Dougla, right? I know many Douglas. I have a few in my family.
And is this an identity marker that people put on themselves, or is it placed upon people?
Like, it happens both ways. It happens both ways. You know, from the time you get invited to somebody's home and they introduce you to their parents. Okay. Yeah. You know what they are, right? So it's not, you know, it's like, you know whether your friend is white or not or whatever, right? Yeah.
So this isn't a term that people would shy away from self-identifying with?
I don't think so. It hasn't been my experience, right? What is important for us to recognize is that because this idea of mixing, and I should say this up front, the word itself, Dougla, as best as I can figure out, having done the research, either means black, bastard, or half caste, right? So the actual root of the word may not be a pleasant one, right?
Has a
Because
pejorative connection.
right, because of course, if you're a bastard, you know, that's not necessarily highly regarded. And certainly in terms of Hindu religious teaching, being a half caste is not something good, because what caste do you belong to?
So is there a struggle you think? I mean, I'm just trying to imagine this. Do you think that you could be in this people group and readily received in both cultures or not?
I think it depends on individual families, right?
Okay.
Because remember, now, yes, you may have had large groups of Hindus coming to these Caribbean spaces, but not all Hinduism is the same, right? There are different forms of Hinduism. Then as the years go on, you have many people are converting to Christianity. So the understanding of peoplehood or personhood will also change with that, right? So you no longer have a caste system, right? And so it really just depends on, and there are some families where you, the those parents, the Black and the Indian couple, sometimes they're rejected. Sometimes one family will reject and another family embrace. Sometimes both families reject. Sometimes both families are like, yeah, whatever. You know,
Yeah.
it's simply, it really comes down to individual family dynamics.
Okay.
Right.
Do you think so? I mean, everything you've shared highlights how intersectional this community is. What are some of the takeaways? What are some of the lessons of that intersectional nature that you think could be really valuable for us?
Wow. Well, just on a personal kind of person to person level, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, this whole idea of endogamy versus exogamy, okay? Who we choose to partner with, who we choose to marry, what does that say about who we are as individuals or how our particular culture responds to that? Because
or what does this say about us as Black people?
right. How, and again, coming back to the kind of theme of your broader theme, right? What does it mean to be Black? Okay, what does it mean to be Black? Because certainly, again, I can only speak about my own kind of intellectualizing and grappling with this idea of Blackness coming out of that kind of British colonial experience, even though I was born post-independence. You know, that's
Yeah, I was
my
about to say, you don't look that old, Alice.
my heritage is that kind of the British experience of colonization, let me put it that way, the more recent one. And so the idea that when I was growing up as a child and understanding Blackness was, if you're not white, you're Black, right? Because, you know, my kind of understanding of how it was, if you went to Britain, if you went to England as a South Asian or as someone of African descent, you were Black, right? And so that kind of experience for me is what shaped me, right? And thinking about it in those terms. Now, having come to the United States, right?
How did that shift?
It does shift, okay? Because of course in the United States, you have this idea of the one drop rule, right? Which is not applied in the Caribbean,
How
okay?
so? Because it sounds like you're saying, like you said, you know, if you went to Britain and
Mm-hmm.
you were not white, you were Black, that sounds sort of like the one drop rule.
Well, but again, my understanding, and of course this is just my understanding,
Yeah.
was that um, your your blackness your blackness didn't depend on whether you came from Africa or India or China or wherever, right? It was that you were not European.
Yeah.
You weren't white, Anglo-Saxon, European, or Francophone or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in the United States, right, the idea that you had one drop of Black blood made you Black, no matter what you phenotypically looked like.
Which
Okay.
is okay.
And that it was imposed upon you, right? You didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, my own Caribbean experience, my own Trinidadian experience allowed me to decide if and how I wanted to be marked, right? Because I can honestly say that I have never filled out any form, any official form that's required me to mark a racial or ethnic group.
Yeah. Which
Okay.
is really interesting because I tell my students about this a lot. People growing up here in the United States, we think that race is the highest value when it comes to identity markers. And I explain to students that there are other parts of the world where this isn't even a question. It's about your religious markers or your ethnic markers. But in the United States, that racial category is so significant to how we have personhood. And so
Right.
students are always floored when I say, hey, look, it's not the same in Venezuela. It's not the same in Korea, you know?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because, like I say, now on my ID card, I think it records my eye color and my skin color, right? And what was interesting is I got my first one at 16 and I didn't pay attention to it. It was like, whatever, national ID card. And then I go back because it expires every 10 years. And for some reason, I had to go and get it renewed. Okay, after living in the United States for a bit of a while. And I get to the official office in December of that year. And someone else is filling out the form, right? The government official is filling out the form, and she marks on my form light skin, right, or light brown,
that's an option.
right? Now, this is what,
What
of
are the
course,
categories?
for me is so funny, right? There is no kind of paint, you know how when you go to pick out paints, you get this. There is nothing like that
Yeah.
on the desk. So now I'm really curious. So I asked, I said, so how did you decide, right? Because when she marked that, I looked at my ID card that was expiring and it said brown, right? So now she's marking something that says light brown, okay? So I'm like, how do you decide, right? And she says, I just decide, right? And that's the arbitrariness of it all, right?
Was she looking
Because,
at your like winter paleness?
right, you know, because I'm thinking, okay, so I'm here in the middle, you know, for me, it's the winter paleness because I ain't going outside, you know, once it hits 70.
Yeah.
right? And then she is also really, really dark, right?
Yeah.
So what are we comparing here, right? And you know, because if there's no kind of scale that I'm seeing in front of me that she can say to me, well, put your hand there or hold it up next to my face. Because of course, even the difference between your this and this.
Yeah, your elbow and your forehead, yeah.
So but this is how arbitrary and silly all this stuff is, right? Because of course, personally, when I go and I pull out the pictures of my grandparents, I can tell you, well, this is what I am and this is what I am. And then when I look at my last names, I can say, you know, here where my people's from. But government officials don't care, right? So they're just looking for shortcuts. So in the case of the United States, it's this, there has historically been this kind of, you're either black or white, okay? Now I see how stuff is getting really interrupted and disrupted, right? Because now we have to start talking about Hispanics in a more nuanced ways. And thank God for Senator Harris. Now we have to start thinking, oh, you mean there are other people here too, right?
Yeah.
So they're Asians, but they're different types of Asians.
They're not just one group.
Right.
And I think part of the challenge is because in the United States, well, let me also just say this. I think globally, like this idea of like where Black falls in the hierarchy of things, globally, most people don't want that category, right? Like most of the places you go, there is a centering of Eurocentrism, their whiteness is present. But in the United States, it's very interesting because the country itself is very much built on that hierarchy. Whereas other places, that hierarchy does exist and it definitely has consequences. But that hierarchy is the heart, right, of what this country exists on.
Yeah.
And the idea that so many people who were ethnically European came here and decided, I can't be ethnic anymore. I have to be white. And that, right? Like, so the fact that those kind of decisions had to happen.
Well, remember too, sometimes it's not necessarily that the group itself made the decision, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it was in the political interests of those in charge to let them in.
For sure,
right?
yes.
You know, so we will allow Jews to be white, right? We will allow Italians and Greeks.
And Irish and, yeah.
Right, okay, even though they didn't start off that way.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
And oh my goodness, Egyptians are white too. Yeah, let's let them in.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and who gets to be right? Like the last group, as far as I know, the last group that got to get that conversion were, oh gosh, where are the Kardashians from? I completely.
Right, Armenia.
Yes, that's the last collective group that got put into that category, right?
Right. And then the poor Chinese in Mississippi, you know, in the 1860s, you know, they had to be Black because, you know, what categories do you have in Mississippi?
It was so
right? In the 1860s.
They had to be Black.
We ain't letting them in, right? And so, and you know, and let's always remember, we've completely erased Native peoples. Okay, right? If we even think about them, you know, they're just monolithic. Okay.
Yeah,
and
that's
so,
a whole, for sure.
So this whole kind of, like you say, the idea that, you know, the whiteness is the ideal. Whiteness is what we have to aspire to. Whiteness is what we hope to be able, you know, let them open up the club a little bit and, you know, let some folks in. So that's really interesting, especially as we see that there are a few folks who actually want to leave the club and come join.
Yeah, when you realize how divisive it is. But I think that binary insistence in the United States. So I think that's why people struggle to see Kamala and say, oh, she's all of these things. Because one of the things that has to happen here is, no, we have to put you in this or that, this or that. And from Black people that I know who have immigrated here, that creates a tension, right? Because I wonder, like, when someone sees you and they say, Alison, African American, I imagine you're like, huh, say what?
Well, I mean, it gets to be different, because like I say, you know, I mean, I can look at my entire just my cousins, right, and see the diversity that is internal to my family, right? And I'm sorry, I'm proud of it. Okay, I know who my people are. I know all the stories about who were the retrobates and who were the saints, and you know, we can joke about them and laugh about them, and we share that commonality, right? At the same point in time, I also recognize that, and I think it is important for me personally to understand where I am now. Okay, so I'm in the United States, where Black people are constantly in the state of tension, right? You know, and you need to create your space, and you have to stand your ground, pun intended, and you have to hold a place. And I'm in complete solidarity with that, because while I may not be African American, I certainly see that this idea of reminding people that we all share in a common experience, no matter where we come from in the diaspora, is really important, right? And you know, even as a social scientist who understands that race is all constructed, but also knowing that we live in a political space where race is contested, right?
Yes.
It is necessary for us to remind, I think it is necessary for us to remind people over and over again that there is so much richness and beauty and grace and intelligence and power, you know, in Blackness. Like I tell my students all the time, you know, I don't want you to think that, you know, we often say to them, you know, you stand on the shoulders of others.
Of the giants,
That's
yeah.
true. That is true, right? But you are also their best wish, their best whatever. They're the people who chose to stay on that boat. And that's not to demean those that jumped off, because certainly that took some level of bravery for you to decide, nah, I ain't dealing with your nonsense, right? But there's a different type of power and strength of a people who chose to survive.
Yeah.
Right? And so this whole concept of what it means to be Black, and is Kamala Black or isn't she Black? I think I would, and I'm imposing upon her now because I've never met her. I don't know her from Adam.
Well, hopefully she sees this video.
But I would say she is Black in the best sense of the word, in that she understands that her Caribbean roots, her South Asian roots, they both share in that British colonial experience. So again, I come back to this idea of, can we understand Blackness in those frames? I don't know if that was her parents' experience, but I can imagine that her parents, given the time that they came of age,
During the Black Power movement.
Black Power, Pan-Africanism, they
Yeah.
probably were deeply exposed to that. You know, both their homelands were going through or had gone through independence movements, right? So you have these two people who then create these beautiful women, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I'm sorry, you can't have that experience. She talks about, you know, the idea of who were her neighbors and who she would spend time with, right? And these women that were Black women that from the neighborhood who raised her, and then going to Canada, and I would imagine having, you know, many of the experiences of Black immigrants, and again, Black broadly defined here, right? Living in Canada, okay? Again, part of that kind of British colonial experience, going there, living there, and then coming to an HBCU, coming to Howard.
Yeah.
I have to say it, even though it's not my HBCU, but I love my Howard friends, right? And so yes, she is Black, right? And most importantly, when she gets stopped by the cops, what do you think they see before she opens her mouth? Because that's what I tell people.
Yeah.
You know, when I enter a room, yes, I may have an accent, but until I open my mouth,
you're just a Black woman.
I'm just another Black woman. Okay.
Yeah.
And then when I call people to account, okay, no matter what accent I have, I become the angry Black woman in the room. Okay. So let's not pretend that she's not Black.
Yeah. Last thing I want to get from you today, there's been so many nuggets here, is, again, I just love listening to you and learning from you. You know, I had this moment where I'm listening to you talking about seeing the stories of your family and knowing who these people are. And, you know, it does to me what happens when I usually hear these things, because those are things I long for, right? As 5 generations out of enslavement here, my family coming from North Carolina, and wishing that I could connect those dots, you know. And I know that's something that a lot of Black people
Sorry about that,
you know, want. And so I think sometimes there is this unstated divide between Black immigrants and then the Black people here. And you and I probably know that, like, any kind of division it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't do anything. So I guess the last thing I'd like us to kind of respond to and think about is, what are the things we can do to help minimize what seems to be like these unspoken, you're different than me? Like, what are the lessons we need to learn to see, like kind of like what you said, is that when we're in the car together, no one's going to ask those kind of questions that make us different. So what are the things we can do to learn from each other and to inspire closeness wherever your Blackness hits you, so to speak?
Okay, so I think on a very personal note, right? Because you know, everything is relational, right? For me, right? Let's just talk about it. How about if you ask me a question, right? How about if you ask me, well, why do you say what you say? Okay. How about if you ask me, well, how did you cook whatever you cooked, right? So when I bring my macaroni pie to the picnic, okay,
you already messed up because you called it macaroni pie, girl.
Right. I'm telling you, it's going to taste better than your mac and cheese, okay? But we can have a taste off, we can have a blind tasting, and we'll figure it out, okay? When I make my potato salad, it is different from yours, but you know what? I learned how to make yours, right? So this is what I'm saying. You know, we've got to recognize, you know, and I forget who said it, but you know, we all came on the same ship. We just landed in different ports.
Landed in different places.
right? So let's not pretend, right? I have sometimes my students do an exercise and I ask them, I say, and I've seen this done with Jewish women and Native American women, and I thought this was really important. When you introduce yourself, can you introduce yourself saying, my name is Alison, daughter of Marion, who is daughter of Euclid, who is daughter of Anastasia. And that's as far back as I can go on my mother's maternal line. Mm-hmm. Okay. How far back can you go? Right? Because that speaks, I think that again kind of reminds us that there is this severing that we all experienced. Right?
Yeah.
When I listen to my Native American friends do that, very often they can go back really a lot longer than we can.
Yeah.
Right? When I listen to some of my Jewish friends, it's more difficult for them. Right? But it is important, and I think it is especially important for us, especially as descendants of African women, to again say their names.
Yeah.
Right? Recognizing that many of us probably came from matriarchal societies. And for us as women living in this space, in our skins, that centering becomes important.
Yeah.
Right? So if you, and I'm making an assumption here, if you, with your Mississippi roots or whatever,
Louisiana
wherever,
and North Carolina.
Oh my God, look at that, right? So if you with those roots, right, can recognize that your Louisiana roots, your North Carolina roots, and I with my Caribbean roots, we have similar experiences. That's really, really important.
Yeah.
And it's okay. It's, I'm an anthropologist and sociologist, so difference is wonderful. Difference is exciting. Difference to me is what makes my work exciting and hard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
But we have to kind of recognize and also acknowledge that this idea of division is purposeful.
For sure. It's such a tool of so many violent systems.
Yeah. So we keep hearing, oh, well, why can't you with your African Americanness get over it? Because look at those Caribbean immigrants or look at those African immigrants. They come and they get whatever. Yeah, but let's dig deeper, right?
Yeah.
Because they're coming from spaces, right, where they're the majority, right? They're very often those people who are migrating they may not be the cream of the crop. I certainly wasn't, but you're not exactly the bottom of the barrel either.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
You
had the resources to exit the scene.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And over time, once they enter the American system, right, and the public school education system that is so violent against Black and brown and Native bodies and working class bodies, over time, we become you. I mean, that's just it, right? We become, because the system does not recognize.
It does not see difference.
No. It just sees us in our physical whatever and makes assumptions about us. So let's not pretend. I heard somebody talk once, they were talking about, changes to the immigration system. And, this was an African immigrant that was saying, somehow they thought they were somehow better because they had just overstayed their visa.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to Hispanics, who they,
Never
in their mind, had come across the border without papers. Right.
Yeah.
So they were trying to make the point that they were somehow better. Guess what? What have we learned today? What have we learned as of late last week? Hispanic women and African women and whoever else women that were in those detention centers were having forced hysterectomies.
Yeah.
Right? So there is no better.
Yep.
Right? And so that's what I want us to kind of recognize, hopefully.
Yeah.
Right? That the system operates on us collectively. Right? It may let a few of us out from time to time because, American exceptionalism has to say.
Yeah, there has to be proof.
Yeah. The rest of us are doing.
Obama.
Yeah. Yeah. All of y'all worthless, whatever, because look, Oprah exists. Right? Fantastic. Nothing to take away from Oprah. But, the exception does not prove the rule.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Alison, this has been so amazing on so many levels. Thank you for your graciousness, for your intelligence, and your telling it as it isness. See, I just made that a word today.
Wow.
Telling it as it isness.
All right. Well, I hope that your listeners and your viewers can take away from this something, even if it is to email me and to say that I was wrong. That's okay. You can send that email. I have really good spam filters.
I'm hoping that this video will get us into Senator Harris's office one day, Vice President Harris's office one day.
Hey, I'm there. I'm there with you.
I'm there, yeah.
Right? I'm there with you. And I will even, I'll even make her some stewed oxtails.
Oh my gosh, okay. You know what?
All right, Senator Harris, I can make me some mean stewed oxtails and some really good curry goat. Okay, and I think the curry goat thing will kind of straddle both cultural. Now, I'm not good at making roti. My roti comes out like coconut bake, so you don't want that. And curry chana and aloo, I'm good with that too.
See, you talking a whole bunch of stuff that I just don't know nothing about.
That's all right. That's all right. When you eat it, you'll start talking Jamaican too. Or I don't know.
Well, take care of yourself because we out here.
All right.
In this COVIDness, we are out here.
No, we're out here, but I'm in here. That's all I gotta say.
Out here, and thank you for it.
We're out there, but I'm in here, and I got my boxes of sanitizing wipes.
How did you get You know what? Okay.
Publix.
Be well.
I'm
gonna text you and figure out who your plug is for the disinfectant wipe. We'll talk later.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.